I asked you to imagine what it may be that Jesus would do if he was here. Would he be in plain sight, or would he just look like one of us? It leads to the question we're going to talk about today, which is what each of us really think Jesus is like. Who Jesus is, what Jesus is, not in just a title, but an understanding. We're going to spend the next couple of weeks looking at some things in Mark's Gospel, chapter 8. And in there's this question. It shouldn't be surprising to us if we're familiar at all with this. Jesus asked a whole lot more questions than he answered. And we've been dwelling on a lot of Jesus' teaching and Jesus' interactions, and those are important. But it's also the questions that he asks that are really important. No bigger question than this question. If you look with me in Mark chapter 8, verse 27, we're in the guts of it now. We'll come back to verse 1 in a minute. But in verses 27 to 29, it says, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Not just what do other people say. Not what have you learned is the right answer. Not what have you read, not what have you heard preached. For you, who do you think Jesus is? And see, we have this, answer here that is given shortly and quickly in Mark's Gospel from Peter. He says, "You're the Messiah," or you're an anointed one. But the question would still be, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you, Peter, compared to what somebody else may be looking for? And we'll uncover a little bit of that. What does that mean? Because we're not looking for a label. We're looking for an understanding. Why would that matter? Well, most of us, we're either here because we're trying to figure out whether we want to, or we're here because we've decided we want to follow Jesus. We're going to learn Jesus' ways. We're going to learn Jesus' way to see life. We're going to live what he did. We're going to become like our teacher. So who we think our teacher is has a big deal to play in who we're going to become. Because if we think Jesus is this way, then shouldn't we be more like that? And if Jesus is not that way at all, shouldn't we let some of that go, even if that's more the way we are? But not just that. Coming back to something that we'll, again, celebrate in the next couple of weeks as we get closer to Easter. On that last night of Jesus meeting with his disciples in his meals in John chapter 14, Jesus has a couple of words. John chapter 14, verse 7, he says, "If you really know me, you know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." Whoever we think Jesus is, apparently Jesus is teaching greatly relates to who we think God is, what we think God is, how we think God is. Jesus is even saying, for you guys who can see me walking around and are walking around with me, if you see the way I act, if you see the way I see, if you hear the way I speak, if you watch what I do and how I do it, you're seeing God. And so however you decide what Jesus is, not what Jay told you, not what some book told you, not what some preacher when you were 8 told you, whatever you think Jesus is also what you, to a large extent, think God is. He goes on, verses 9 and 10, in that same part in John 14, Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. But how can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who's doing his work." That Jesus is even pointing here that, like, the words I say aren't just my words, they're God's words. The works that I'm doing, the way I behave, who I hang with, who I speak to, how I touch, don't touch, what I do. When you've seen me, you're seeing the Father at work in me. This is what God is like. And so what does it mean then to come to that conclusion? It's actually, for those of you who are here on a regular basis, part of the reason why I spend the most significant amount of this one moment we get together each week in the Gospels is because I think the most significant thing we can possibly do is have the words of Jesus and the actions of Jesus, not even what Paul or somebody else wrote about those later, as the place that we start from. And we may go visit some things in the Old Testament and say, see, this is where it was working. We may see some things in the New Testament beyond that to do that, but building on the case that who Jesus is, which is who God is, to you and me, is everything. Because it actually shapes what we're going to say and what we're going to do and how we understand ourselves and how we understand others. And so I want to encourage you and invite you in this Easter week coming up between now and Easter to try to answer that question. To try to answer that question by doing these three things. By considering what it is that you think the answer is. By taking time to think about it. To evaluate it, to challenge it, to consider. Then to record, and I'm using that word on purpose because for some of us, we're just not really sure our handwriting is worth it anymore. But whether you write something down or you type something down or you say something into something that you somehow record, because you need to have it in front of you, outside of yourself. What does it mean to outside of yourself go, I think Jesus is this. I think Jesus is about that. I think Jesus doesn't have anything to do with this. This is what God is and is like. And then the third one is to share it with at least one person. That over the course of the next couple of weeks, what would it be for me to stop and go, not just what have I been taught, what do I believe? Not just what is the right answer, what is my answer? And to get it not just in my head that I think about sometimes, but out in front of me that I could go, I don't know how to put that in words. And then to share those words with at least one other safe person. This isn't I'm not trying to trick you into like doing some evangelism, like go meet somebody on a street corner and say, I'm supposed to tell you, my pastor said tell you this. Like that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying find somebody else that you're not scared to say, this is the best I understand about Jesus right now. And just take two turns. Or maybe it's just somebody who isn't from here, doesn't know anything about this. They don't have to do it too. But as we do that, there's also this warning that we find in the first half of Mark chapter 8. And so let's turn to Mark chapter 8 again, beginning in verse 1. And find the context where this question eventually comes up. And find something that we might want to ask ourselves as we do this, as we consider, as we record, as we share, as we think about Jesus, as we think about God, as we think about what I'm growing up into then. How might these words also maybe help me put some guardrails around what I believe? In Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, there's a story of Jesus doing a miraculous feeding. It's not the first story. The feeding of the 5,000 happens in chapter 6 in Mark's gospel. This is the feeding of 4,000. It's separate and different. It's the second time. Listen as we hear the story and it sets things up. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. Now, don't miss, if you're really starting to think about these things, even right there, Jesus is somebody who has compassion. Jesus has compassion for all, not just the best students, not just the rich ones, not just the holier ones. Jesus cares about their daily needs. He's really concerned about them eating and really concerned about them traveling and really concerned about their lives. That might need to factor in who do I think this Jesus is and whatever that means that he's a Messiah or an anointed one. But here's the situation, and then we hear verse 4. The disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" That sounds just like an unbelievably logical question, except for the fact that weren't you in chapter 6, dudes? This is another opportunity, and you're going, but what could we do? It's seemingly impossible. Right. It's comforting. They're more messed up than we are. Not really. We're as messed up as they are. Here we go. It says, verse 5, "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asks. 7, they replied. Now think about that, even just the math for those of us who like to be really factual, math-oriented people. We got less people and we got more loaves than we had last time. But how could it possibly work? Verse 6, he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. Yay! He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got in the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. So, again, Jesus, if we're looking, isn't just concerned, but Jesus seems to really want to recognize gratitude even before things become miraculous. Jesus doesn't do stuff on his own and go, poof, 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 all of you got food in your hands. But Jesus somehow is working with the disciples, even while they're struggling to be worked with, that we're doing this together. All those things may be things you want to think about at some point when you say, like, who is Jesus? What is Jesus? What does that mean God is like? And this miraculous thing happens, and they have all this left over. Now, I have no idea if a basket is just the right size for a loaf, or if a basket is really small and a loaf kind of sticks out, or if a basket is huge and if you have a loaf in it, it kind of falls to the bottom. But I know this, you started with 7 loaves and you ended with 7 baskets full. Something doesn't work because you gave stuff away to 4,000 people. And so even if the basket is smaller, especially if the basket is big, the message is one of abundance. It's not, how could we do it? So many people, so little food. But that God is at work in the words and in the actions of Jesus in this moment to do something that cares and is compassionate and is grateful and then distributes it to all, and then there's more than enough left over, so much so that we have to collect it, and it may be even more than we started with. And then they're done, and they get in a boat and they go to another place. And this place, Dalmanutha, there's no place marker. So we don't really know where exactly did the boat go and where exactly did the boat land. But when it lands, then they're going to encounter further people. Look with me at verse 11. They get somewhere and they get off the boat. And then it said, verse 11, the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it." And don't you at this moment read like me and go, baskets of bread left over. Do you need another sign? This is the second time. Can't you just use this sign? Why doesn't Jesus just go, dudes, we were just over there. 4,000 people, 7, couple of fish. They all ate. We still got some stuff in the boat. You want to eat? Like, why? Why don't you just do that? But that's the thing is, these Pharisees, they're not asking Jesus, just can you do something miraculous? Jesus is going to do multiple things that are miraculous. All kinds of healings, all kinds of deliverances, miracles like this, but that's not what they're really asking for. We're going to see that more clearly in just a second even. They're asking, if you're an anointed one, then surely you're going to be like maybe Elijah. Are you going to give us a sign like Elijah? You know, Elijah called all the enemies, those who worshiped Baal and Asherah, and had all their people come, and then Elijah stopped everybody in the world on top of Mount Carmel and said, bring down the fire, and it was miraculous, and then we went and killed all the bad people. Don't you want to do a sign like that, Jesus? Aren't you going to be an anointed one like King David? Aren't you going to collect your thousands upon thousands of trophies from killing other people's soldiers? They're looking for a sign based on a set of beliefs of what they want God to be and want God to do. And Jesus doesn't fit that. Jesus, in this moment, is going like, giving them the, I'm super compassionate for all the people, no matter who they are, and I took some fundamental bread and fish and fed them all, and there was more than enough left over because God doesn't run out, isn't the kind of sign you want, so I don't even need to bring it up. And in their mind, see, that just proves you're a fake. It says that Jesus says they're not going to get a sign. In verse 13, then he says, then he left them and they got back into the boat and they crossed to the other side. So the disciples, they've trafficked with Jesus to this place. They've seen this second miracle of the feeding. They got in the boat. They went over to this other place. They got out of the boat, spent whatever time they did. While they were there, Pharisees confronted Jesus. Jesus said, there ain't going to be any sign like you want a sign. They get back in the boat, however long that took. And now with Jesus, they're traveling in the boat again. I believe this part of the story is probably in the boat. It could be after this boat lands. But just picture, they're all riding in the boat now. And beginning in verse 14, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. So by the time they get done with Dalmanutha and get back in the boat, they're there, and somebody has a loaf, and that's all they've got. And it says, verse 15, be careful. Here's the warning, Jesus. Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod, or the Herodians, maybe more than one Herod. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. And then, Jesus lays his head down, and they keep floating by and doing their thing. And a conversation begins to kick up with the disciples. They discussed this with one another and said, is it because we have no bread? What? He said yeast. He's saying, should we not have gotten the bread from the Pharisees? Or were we supposed to get bread from the Pharisees? Were we not supposed to get bread in Dalmuth? Do we have enough bread? Is there enough bread? Is Jesus mad at us because we didn't bring enough bread? Are you poor packer? Whose turn was it to bring the bread? How much bread did we need? Because Jesus, he's, being passive-aggressive here in some way, not telling us the truth, but making us all feel like we probably don't know what we're doing. Is that true? Or is that just inside of you? Because it says, aware of their conversation, Jesus asks them, why are you talking about having no bread? See, yeast in this case, and for those of us we've been studying together, we heard Jesus tell a parable about the yeast of the kingdom. Like the yeast spreads through dough. It just is invisible and it's there, but finally it passes its way all the way through it. It's something that spreads. And so whatever he's saying is about that kind of yeast, that there's something of the Pharisees and there's something of Herod or the Herodians, and there are things that, like, don't let it seep into you. Don't let it get all over you. Don't let it wash through you, because it affects who you are and who you become. It affects how you see what's important, so how you see God. And he's saying that to this group that he's been teaching, and they've been walking around with him, and they're going like, whose turn was it to get the bread? And Jesus even gets very clear about this. He says, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? Don't you remember? Remember what? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketful of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. Right. There were 12 of you. Each of you had a basket. Remember? You had to go up on cleanup duty, and you all couldn't even carry your baskets because you had so much stuff. Remember? And then he says, and when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? And they answered, 7. And he said to them, do you still not understand? I'm not talking about bread. I got plenty to work with our 1 loaf. There's 13 of us, 1 loaf. I got it. Because this isn't about that. This is about this warning. And what does that warning mean? How could it have something to shape me? Well, Pharisees. The Pharisees aren't all bad characters. They're not all the same to begin with, but they're not all bad characters. We don't need to just lump them into their bad people. They're people who are taking things seriously. They're taking their religion seriously. But their religion has led them to a set of answers and questions that they think they have that may not jive with Jesus. And so when they ask Jesus for a sign, the kinds of signs he's doing isn't what they're asking for, because they have a theology. And some of us, we're not super on board of understanding this yet, but they have a theology that's based in the exile. Their theology didn't start with Genesis and evolve. Genesis and all of those are being put together, understood, collected, making into this Hebrew scriptures because of the exile in the 700s before Jesus and in the 500s before Jesus, when there's still a kingdom and they still have kings and they split. And there's Israel and Judah, but they both represent God's people, the Israelites. And then the Assyrians are bigger and stronger, and the Babylonians are bigger and stronger. And they end up wiping out some of them and taking others off to exile. And they're asking the question, they're trying to figure out, where is God in all this? How could this have happened? And then the Persians take over all of that and let them return to Jerusalem and start rebuilding the temple. This is part of Israelite history. But as a result, lots of what we think of as the Pharisees' theology is a theology of God the judge who rewards and punishes, who's watching closely and gives to those who deserve it, and otherwise lets you get crushed for a little while, teach you a lesson, lets you get exiled. Because surely our God is not so small that the other countries, nations, tribes, that their gods are better than ours. So if their God is not better than ours, and he's the God over us, but see, that's part of the problem too. He's not just the God over you, but in their mind, he's the God over our tribe. And so one day, if we are really, really good, if we obey, and if we stay away from other bad people, if we stay super pure, and if we stay super clean, and we do all the rules right, then surely God's going to show up for us against them and crush them so that we could be number one again. And so much of what they do as they look out is who's clean and who's unclean. We don't touch those people. They have that sin. That came from their lineage. Ooh, no. We were born in a line that has always worked in the temple. We come from a line that's priestly. We come from a line that's kingly. The line of your blood matters, because there are Jews that don't qualify as Jews anymore. Because of the exile, they're Samaritans. They intermarried with others, so they don't really count anymore. God doesn't love them. God doesn't like them. And so they're caught up in this purity sense of following the rules, even if the rules hurt people, even if the application of them are no longer loving. They are all into shame. Who's not enough? Because here's the thing that relates to our story. Because they are teaching a theology of scarcity. There is not enough God love and God favor to go around, so only the best ones get it. So how do we decide who the best ones are? And how do we be the best ones so that God doesn't hurt us instead of help us, punish us instead of reward us? How can we determine that? And that's where Jesus is like, I'm not doing any of that. Everybody you think's unclean and unworthy of you, I'm touching them. Everybody you think is punished for their sin, they aren't punished for their sin. They're just blind. They're just lame. And God loves them. And I'm here to heal them, to show you they're no different than you. There are laws, but I don't even keep all of them on purpose. I'm going to heal on the Sabbath just to show you that the rule wasn't for the people. The people are here so that the rule can help reveal what love might look like and priorities, but not because who's the perfect obedient person God likes more, and who doesn't, God rejects. And so I just want to challenge us. Pharisees care deeply and they work hard, but their whole part of their theology shapes what they want the Messiah to be. And Jesus doesn't check all those boxes. That's why at some point he needs to be gotten rid of, because he's getting in the way. He doesn't fulfill our expectations. And so be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees. Now for just a couple of minutes, it also says the yeast of Herod. Herod the Great is the king leader. He calls himself the king of the Jews at the time of Jesus' birth. His son takes over, Herod Antipas, and he's the one who's around for killing John the Baptist. And when Jesus is going to be resurrected, and he's going to make sure to have a couple of those guards killed because they didn't guard the tomb well. These two men, the Herods, are the witness of politics. To just make it a summary word. It's economics, it's social, it's nations, it's military, but it's politics. What are the values of Herod? Well, power at any cost. See, there isn't an abundance. There isn't baskets full. You only have a limited amount of power, and to be in power is the only way for you to be safe, the only way for you to be successful. And so you obsess on power. You're paranoid that anybody else is going to take your power. Anybody who doesn't agree with you and think you're all awesome, Mr. Leader, then they are your enemy and they deserve to be destroyed. Truth doesn't matter. What matters is whatever I say, whichever benefits me, because I'll make up my own truth. Deception and manipulation. I demand complete loyalty from you as long as it serves me, but the moment your loyalty makes me look bad, then I'm cutting you loose. It doesn't matter if you're family. It doesn't matter if you've served me. I'll actually have my wife killed. I'll actually have my sons killed. Do you remember the Herod story? I'm the king of the Jews. Hey, there's this king of the Jews that's been born. Well, that is a threat. There's competition. I've got to restore my honor. I've got to make sure my power's intact. So what do? I go to the religious ones, and I have all the religious leaders. Hey, since we're all on board together, since I'm really king of the Jews, but he wasn't. What did he do as king of the Jews? He helped expand the temple. Why? So he could be known as a great builder, not because he gave a rip about what happened inside the temple. He also built pagan temples, and he also built military fortresses. It wasn't because he was sold out to the holiness of God. It was because he wanted to manipulate the people of God. And then what does he do? He hears and says, hey, these magi, come close. I want to be a worshiper like you guys. I'm seeking out the one you're seeking out. I'm interested in your religion being my religion and your new king being my king. So just let me know, what is it that you're up to? If you find him, tell me so that I could go be a good religious person too. But that's a lie, because all he's doing is scheming with his ruthless schemes to make sure he stays in power. And the minute that he finds out, what's he going to do? He's going to send his military to another place to kill innocent children. That's Herod. Be careful of Herod, because we can get the view of Jesus and of God that somehow God is about power, that somehow God makes up his own truth, that somehow God's going to get the bad people however you want, that somehow we can justify loyalty to us but separateness from them, when that's the exact opposite Jesus is doing. Jesus' whole message is that the power I have, I give away, that there's enough for all. That it isn't about God of the Jews, it's about the God who loves everybody. That the whole point of the Jews having anything was that they would be the tribe to bless other tribes, not the tribe to conquer other tribes. And so this little story that could be fun and funny and, man, why are these guys just idiots and why do they think it's about a loaf of bread? Is actually a huge, huge warning. Because many of us surround ourselves with political talk 24/7 when we are sitting at home and don't think it has any way of shaping what we think about other humans, what we think about ourselves, what we think about God, what we think about Jesus. And Jesus becomes the mascot of our violent military instead of Jesus becoming the one who wrecks our own hearts to love our enemies because they actually are just like us and God loves them just as much. It's hard to be a follower of Jesus if you are a follower of Herod. It is hard to be a follower of Jesus if your religious view is that God watches so that he will give a little bit of love to those who really, really deserve it, and all the rest of you, you're just out of luck because you're not good enough. Jesus is asking, who do you guys actually think I am? Given that you've been infected with religious and political thoughts, and actions of power, and actions of what's called love, actions of worship, and actions of devotion, beliefs about who the good people and bad people are. You've been infected by all that. And in order to see and hear and understand the kingdom, you might have to squeeze some of that out. And it doesn't just happen in his day, it happens in every day. It doesn't just happen with those leaders. It happens with leaders of all kinds, over all generations. It doesn't just happen with people in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. It happens with every heart that is tempted to think life is scarcity. There's never enough. I'm not enough. There won't be enough. If I share my stuff, others will get it instead of me. When the whole message of the two miracles, even the miracle Jesus won't claim, is that actually there's abundance. God takes what is, and he uses everybody who will, and he gives what everybody needs, and then there's more. There's more than that. It's a statement on the grace of God. There's not a scarcity of God's love. It's gracious and it's overabundant, and if you would just participate in it, you'd find that you can never get to the end of the basket. But if you listen and adhere to all the fears, and worry about making sure you win now or you win in heaven one day, while other people lose because they're not good enough, or they weren't slick enough, or they weren't powerful enough, you're never going to be able to answer the question, who is Jesus? In a way that remotely looks like what he said and what he did. I hope this week you will consider for yourself, not trying to mimic me, not my answers, that you'll consider, that you'll record, that you'll share wherever you are at this moment. This is what I'm coming to believe Jesus is and has done and is about. And so this is what I believe God is and is doing and is about. And it would provide you some clarity and then how you're going to live every day moving forward. God, will you help us as much as we're just like these disciples and can just miss what's right in front of us, that we can worry and be in fear that we're not doing it right and that you might be disappointed with us. Instead, will you help us back up and see the influences that just come from humanity? What happens when we, in fear, try to define who you are or what you want us to do or figure out how to control you so that we can feel safe? What does it mean when we think winning in this world means making sure others lose? What does it mean when we start to justify whatever it takes for us to make sure we feel safe and successful, even if it's unloving? Will you help us meet with you and feel a sense of some clarity and a whole lot of questions that help us take one more step forward in following you in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I invite you to take your hymnals and turn to hymn number 491, Wherever He Leads, I'll Go. Let's stand.